Welcome to the Jali podcast. I'm your host, Melyssa Barrett. This podcast is for those who are interested in the conversation around diversity, inclusion, and equity. Each week, I'll be interviewing a guest who has something special to share or is actively part of building solutions in this space. Let's get started. Douglas C. Freeman is the president of the Global Reflections and Inclusive Leadership Practice, the Diversity and Inclusion Division at UniWorld Group, Incorporated, a global multicultural communication and advertising firm. Global Reflections is a sophisticated line of client offerings that provide corporations with a deep portfolio of holistic diversity and inclusion best practices, customized to the client's specific business needs. Mr. Freeman and UWG have completed diversity and inclusion projects for some of the world's leading organizations, from Disney and Major League Baseball to Morgan Stanley and the European Union Commission in Brussels. Mr. Freeman and UWG have completed diversity and inclusion projects for some of the world's leading organizations, from Disney and Major League Baseball to Morgan Stanley and the European Union Commission in Brussels. Mr. Freeman has served as vice chairman of the United Nations Gender Equality Experts Panel, was named a 40 under 40 business leader by the New York City Network Journal, and is a former board trustee of Georgetown College, U.S. educational partner of Regent's Park College, Oxford University, and he recently served on the Dean's Alumni Leadership Council at the JFK School of Government, Harvard University. He holds a master's in public policy degree from the John F. Kennedy School at Harvard University, an MBA Essentials credential from the London School of Economics, along with a Bachelor of Arts from the University of California at Berkeley. He attended Harvard University on a Woodrow Wilson Fellowship, completed his graduate degree focused on international trade and finance, and received top grade for his master's thesis work. He is a two-time British Columbia Under-19 Rugby All-Star, two-time Canadian Universities All-Canadian, and was selected for the Canada Under-21 team as a Rugby All-Star. He is the son of Emmy Award-winning conductor Maestro Paul Freeman, the first African-American to lead a Canadian symphony orchestra. Please join me in welcoming Doug Freeman. All right. Well, this week I am so excited to have Doug Freeman here with me from UWG. And before we start, I want to publicly thank you for being so very supportive of so many people. But for me personally, because I mean, you are such a mentor to others. You truly walk the walk and lift as you climb. So I really want to thank you for your encouragement. You're certainly one of the reasons that I'm so interested in this work. And you not only understand, kind of your own ability to use your wisdom, but the power of your own network. So I just want to thank you for what you've done for me and for what you do for everyone else around the world regarding DEI and the environmental, social, and governance aspects of it. So thank you. And we will celebrate you today, Doug.
Oh, that's very kind, Melyssa. Such an opportunity and good blessings to be here. So thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah, no. So one of the things I usually start out with is just, Can you give us a flavor for how you started out? Because I know you've been doing DEI probably longer than people have been saying DEI.
For a while.
Yes.
It's been a while. So I guess they could say I've had a bit of a circuitous route, some zigs and some zags, but been very fortunate throughout. I started out as an undergrad. I started out initially on the East Coast and ultimately transferred and finished my degree locally in the Bay Area at Cal. And I was a poli-sci major and economics minor. With that degree, I went to New York City. A friend of mine was at NYU Law School, and I visited him and was very impressed by the city and the vibrance, the diversity, the culture, the global nature of New York. And I just wanted to experience for a summer. And at the time, I had the opportunity to work at what's now Verizon. It was the local 9X telephone company. And one of my bosses referred me into my next job, which is in investment banking at an organization called Chase Security. That is now JP Morgan Chase. And I worked in turnaround investment banking for organizations that were in dire straits. And a fair amount of work needed to be done to pull them out, or at least to gather whatever assets could be gathered from those organizations. From there, I went to public policy school. I didn't go to business school. I was fortunate enough to have a fellowship, and I went to government school in the Boston area, and then I got a master in public policy, came back to New York, and I switched over to consulting. I worked in Deloitte Consulting Strategy Group, focused on communications and media. And at the time, I was going on that first wave of internet companies in the late 90s. And one of my colleagues was from graduate school, was a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford, and he started an internet company in England, and he set up an office in New York. So I had the opportunity to move from Deloitte to this internet company in my late 20s. And of course, I knew nothing about what I was doing in sales and business development. So I had to learn very quickly. There were 4 of us running an office of 4 to 6 when I started. And within 6 months, there were over 70 of us in the same New York office. So we grew very rapidly. Of course, March 2000 hit and the internet bubble burst. We were very fortunate to actually raise funds in Europe, and that allowed us to continue operations. They closed after that fundraise. They closed the New York office. So that ended that sort of, I want to say, first wave of my career, and started me on a second wave. And after that, I didn't want to go back to consulting or banking. I wanted to try something on my own. And a good colleague of yours, Melyssa, Linda McGee, I met at a trade show, and one of the biggest trade shows. And I reached out to her, and I told her I'd be in the Bay Area. And I thought there were some, she had some strategic business issues to discuss. And we were able to spend a considerable amount of time together. And she was kind enough to give me a consulting engagement. And I worked on an e-commerce strategy report for Visa around B2B e-commerce portals, and the possibility of Visa actually making a considerable investment in one of those portals, and what's the competitive landscape and analysis and financial forecast. And ultimately, the recommendation, given the treacherous nature of March 2000, a whole host of other factors, was to not proceed. And that would have been an 8-figure investment Visa was looking at. And of course, that was the right call at the time. I think I got a little bit of credibility from that, and continued to work with Linda and the Visa team over multiple years. So I'll stop there. That's,
wow.
Yeah.
Well, and fast forward to now, you are the president of the Reflections practice at UWG, which is the longest standing multicultural marketing agency in the country. And I love the fact that you all call it the Reflections practice, because it just, it's like looking in a mirror, I guess, when you're really exposing where everyone is on kind of the DEI spectrum.
Right.
So, I mean, I know you speak to chief diversity officers and CEOs all the time, and everybody's kind of in a different place when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, belonging. How how does someone get started? How does a company really kind of get started? What's your kind of advice to them?
We have, as we can imagine, had a lot of companies that have gotten started, particularly in this last 18 to 24 months. And there's been a lot of pressure as well to get started from internal forces and external. And so, for a while we had to reflect on practice, Melyssa, for that very question, because how you start will dictate, believe it or not, how you finish. And the more important thing is not how you finish, but if you finish effectively and you reach your objective. So we wanted to provide a simple formula for people so that they can have comfort in knowing what to do in that situation, anywhere in the world, any size, any organization. And we call that the 3 A's as an apple. And the first A is around assessment. You really need to determine and get baselines using your organizational data and other data points. Where is your organization around diversity and inclusion of talent, culture, and marketplace, and supply chain, community and philanthropic investments, stakeholder engagement? Where do you really stand? And get data to lay out where you stand, not conjecture or opinion, but heavy quantitative and qualitative data points. From that analysis and data collection and baselining, you'll be able to prioritize your top actions, right? Because what really has transpired for the bulk, if not the heavy majority of organizations in the last 24 months, is that they didn't do the assessment. They went straight to action. They just started councils or ERGs, and they didn't build a strategy, and they didn't have any data supporting that strategy. And so it was based on conjecture and opinion and gut feel. Unfortunately for diversity, that cannot be the driver, because everybody's got conjecture, opinion, and gut feel. And there's no real compass to guide you to what to do and what can be the most effective and what can be the most efficient utilization of your resources and time. And as a result, when you're in action mode and nothing else, and you're doing a bunch of activities, over a year or two, people get frustrated, and that's what's happening. You have diversity councils and ERGs that have had 80% drop off since mid last year. So that's the second A, action. The third A is accountability. You need to have accountability related to those actions. It's not just metrics accountability. You need to be able to show as an organization that you're committed to diversity through thick and thin, through restructurings and the bad times as well as the good. The strength of an accountable organization around diversity is that when things are tough, diversity does not go by the wayside. It is not the first thing cut. In fact, it is usually kept or expanded because people have done well around it. So those 3 A's are really what we used as foundations for people's strategic direction.
That's fantastic. So, and clearly, how you start out with that assessment, if it's not deep enough, if it's not broad enough, I connect the dots to what your effectiveness rate is going to be. So, and then in terms of UWG, because I do feel like, having gotten to know you a little bit, UWG has a little bit of a different perspective that you bring to the table when you think about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Because I think a lot of companies feel like this is an extra cost center. And you really bring in a perspective in terms of being able to craft opportunities from the DEI work. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So when we do our assessment work, you're absolutely right around the data. There are typically 1 to 2 types of standard data for assessment. One is your organizational data, right? That's employee engagement surveys and focus groups and interviews and exit data and HR metrics, turnover data, recruitment data, performance evaluations, and a whole host of other areas that you utilize, and you compare and contrast based on different demographic categories. If you see that your Latina female, your Latina category or Latin female category has a 30% turnover rate, and the rest of your organization only has 10, with a delta of 20 percentage points, you know that there's a fundamental breakdown. So that's why we compare and contrast our demographic areas across the data to see if there are disparities or differences that are gaps, that are strategic challenges that need to be addressed and have real business impact. The second layer of data is best practices. So that can be acquired from, all sorts of organizations, all sorts of associations, particularly around diversity and inclusion, diversity research. So the acquisition of best practices to be aware of what practices are around recruiting and what are they around retention and development and a whole host of other areas. And then as you move to the third area, the big differentiator is the business data, what we call diversity ROI data. We look for a subset of missed business opportunities called missed diversity business opportunities. And those are called blind spots. And the idea is to identify, quantify, and monetize those blind spots for real monetary impact and bottom line impact. So you get 3 tiers of data in most organizations and their business strategies. If they even do them, you'd get 1, maximum 2 tiers.
Wow, that is dropping some knowledge right there in terms of the assessments. I love that. And then, to take that process a little bit further, because I know you all focus also on kind of ESG and the environment and social impacts. Are there things that companies can think about when they're looking at DEI as a function of, sustainability and social impact?
Right.
Are there ways to bring those things together so that they're not, essentially so disparate, I think, in people's minds?
Yeah, so there are a few of these models. You're absolutely right. Oftentimes, the largest, group of kind of configurations around separate silos. So there's an ESG department, and they focus on their activities. And then there's a diversity department. The second one is a hybrid of the two, where diversity is the overall department and ESG is housed within it. The third one is the opposite, where ESG is the overall department and diversity is housed within ESG. And we've seen organizations with all 3 models. And so part of the first level of discussion is to figure out which model either is currently in place or makes the most sense for the organization. And then you have to figure out why one model has more merit in your organization versus another. Sometimes it's like, ESG has been around for 10 years, diversity is brand new, or vice versa. The bulk of our relationships are in diversity. So, of course, we have diversity as a lead and ESG secondarily. So you really have to look at the history of the organization to determine which of the 3 models is likely the best fit or is the current model and why that is the case. And then sometimes you're going to have to adjust the model with the times because ESG, from an investor perspective, is the hottest category of investing. So even if you have ESG underneath diversity, you may strategically decide that that's got to flip because they want to see the ESG moniker as a lead, not the diversity one, and diversity can support the efforts of ESG.
Interesting. So then, because I do think that in some cases, people feel like they can hire a consultant and it's very cookie cutter. They come in, they tell you what you need to be doing, and this is how it should work in your organization. But you're kind of saying, no, it's not a one size fits all. You really have to understand what the culture is like, what the company is like, how they exist today so that you can really develop more of a long-term plan. So how, for people out there that have been, kind of having the focus, or maybe the light went on 18 months ago, and they started to say this is what they wanted to do. And now I think there's a lot of frustration with, not having
Right.
results to report or not enough results or so are there things that you think that we should be looking at as a as a community, if you will, to try and make sure that people don't get that fatigue when it comes to, I mean, the work is long, right?
Absolutely.
This is not a short play. So what kind of things can you do to help folks stay motivated?
So you have to, first of all, frame the journey. It's going to be a journey, but we have a framing of it, a maturity model, which we describe as diversity 5.0. 1.0 universe is the universe of compliance, policies, practices, procedures, standard diversity demographics like EEO data. And oftentimes that universe is very sorely behind in an organization. So work has to be done there. There are gaps there, and you identify them and you address them. 2.0 universe is the workforce and the workplace, and that's where arguably the bulk of organizations have and are currently focused. And the 3.0 universe is the marketplace. It's customers and clients, communities, supply chain, supplier diversity activities, philanthropy, and the like. 1 to 3 is really where 90%, 95% of the companies that we work with and that we're aware of are kind of in that ballpark. 4.0 is innovation, leveraging diversity of thought, and there are different diversity innovations for business process, services, products, decision-making, innovation. All of those areas are critical when you're looking at diversity 4.0. And then 5.0 is a big milestone. We want to get to that because it's business integration. Diversity is integrated in the D&I of everything you do at the board level, senior exec, mid managers, and individual contributors. And that's not where the fun ends or the diversity strategy and work ends. It's where it begins, because 5.0 is a continuous improvement model. And so the organization is continuously improving and gaining competitive advantage over its direct competitors. Now, the second part of the framing is around what's going on for the length of the diversity initiative for impact. Diversity initiatives should be bare minimum 3 years project plan, more realistically 5 years. So most of our clients we describe as their plans as diversity transformation 2025. So diversity 2025, looking 4 or 5 years out with specific objectives around each year. You know, your first year is your data collection and building what we call the DEI business plan. Your second year is some pilots and low-hanging fruit. Your third year is infrastructure and rollout. Your fourth year is, evaluation. And your fifth year is moving into that integration model.
Wow, that's awesome. Awesome. Love it. Let's pause for a moment. We'll be right back. So just to kind of flip the script a little bit, because I know as you introduced yourself and went through your journey and how you are focused today, and truly your journey has not been specifically United States focused. Mm-hmm. You actually do a lot globally in terms of, the network and the mentorship and the teaching and all of those things. Are there lessons that you see that we can learn from the global stage versus the United States itself?
Yeah, so there is another model which is very important from a global diversity perspective. As you know, all of our organizations are seeing impact from the shifting demographics. And we take this model from the European Union. It's called the 6 strands of diversity. And it starts with age, gender, disability, religion, sexual orientation, and race, ethnicity, and immigration status. And with that tool, you can start to go into the country and see what matters most. So in France, it would probably be women and LGBTQ plus, and then that immigration piece probably third.
Yeah, that seems really interesting as well, because it's almost like when you have different countries or, even different companies, they can be focused or their priorities may be different based on where they are, where they do business.
Yes.
And how they relate to the engagement of not only their employees, but their customers.
Right.
Yeah. So, I think that's really an interesting, and, with even the George Floyd murder, we saw worldwide, support for really focusing on so many different stories and providing space for people.
Mm-hmm.
So being as a person, I know when you went through this process and your journey, you distinctively missed the entire portion of your rugby life and the rugby champion that you are. So I wonder if, do you pull anything from your time in rugby for some of this?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I give you so much credit because, Melyssa, you go above and beyond. That's the first time I've ever been asked a question about that in my professional working career. So I thank you for that question. Yeah, to put some context around that, I was almost like an army brat. My parents were classically trained musicians, and I was born in Dallas, Texas. When I was one, moved to Detroit, Michigan. My dad was with the Dallas Symphony, and the Detroit Symphony in his first break was on the west coast of Canada in Victoria, British Columbia, with the Victoria Symphony. So I was in Victoria from 9 to 18, my formative years, and in particular high school. And from almost 6 through 12 with 1 year off due to having a broken wrist, I played throughout. And I didn't just play in high school. Some people play in club teams. I was selected, fortunately, in my 11th grade year to play on the province. So that'd be like your state. It would be the state all-star team as a junior all-star for the state in that sport of rugby. And I played in the Canadian junior championships. I played when I was 17, 18, and when I was a freshman at 19 years old. And I had the good fortune to start the whole time and had the good fortune to be a champion in each case. So I learned a lot. I think I learned a very strong business and focal kind of mentality. When we were, we took the approach much more of the New York Yankees. This was a business trip. We didn't mess around. We were there to be the best. And so when you have that focus and you have that, I learned that business mentality on that team. And I think ultimately there are a whole host of team dynamics and learning to work with people from very diverse backgrounds that are very transferable. Those are the soft skills. Like how do we talk to each other at lunch, right?
Yes.
Or on a 3-hour, 4-hour, 5-hour bus, and do we just sit with the same people? Do we mingle a bit? Do we stay cliquey, or does the group kind of engage with each other? So there are a lot of what they describe as what are now many of the skills we suggest in inclusive leaders: leading with empathy, putting oneself in another's shoes, not having unconscious biases with people, really communicating effectively. There are a lot of kids from rural areas, some kids from public schools, private schools, big schools, small schools, big city, little city. So you're going to have to deal with that and engage people effectively and be perceptive to understand that people need to be engaged in different ways. So I think, there were some lessons learned throughout that process, for sure.
Wow, that's phenomenal. And it's funny that you bring that up because for me, I felt like an army brat because my dad worked for Xerox and he was into marketing way back when. I don't know if you remember that commercial, It's a Miracle.
Yes, absolutely.
With Xerox. That was his campaign. It was like so crazy to me back then. But we moved every 18 months because of the way that he, moved and developed in the company.
Right.
And at the time, of course, when you're a child, you don't like moving around and meeting new people every 18 months. But now it does I noticed the difference in the soft skills of being able to communicate and connect with people, which is truly a skill. I mean, you want people to feel comfortable, to feel connected and safe when you're having a conversation, whether it's on a business or personal level. So I love the fact that you bring that up, and especially in the United States where we may not hear so much about rugby,
right?
But
absolutely,
but it's such a great sport for trying to understand how people work with each other,
yes.
And really get to know each other as they go.
Yes, that is.
So that's phenomenal. So I know you are such a busy person, but I want to make sure that I also ask you a question about kind of your most impactful advice. I know you grew up in a family of people that did things first, and you tend to have that mentality of, being the best, whether you're the first or not, and being the first can be challenging. Knowing that there's a lot of firsts coming out, especially for companies. Yeah. You might be the first this or the first that. Is there something you can kind of give us in terms of, how can we channel that energy to be as impactful as possible?
Well, timing that question is also aptly timed, Melyssa, because career-wise, you have to do what you do well, and you have to find out what you love in order to do that well. And I found that providing advice around diversity, equity, inclusion has been the most fun I've had in business, I'll say, to date. But a few years ago, I knew I had, you mentioned rugby, I have a passion for sports. I'm what one would call a sports fanatic. I love all types of sports. I watch a lot of sports, and I believe in the power. Sports truly is the most globally impactful and positive tool of unification in societies around the world, and it brings the world's societies together in healthy competition. You look at soccer and the World Cup and the love of country, but in the love of people celebrating the joy that comes from sports. And so a couple of years ago, looked with a couple of colleagues, we're not wealthiest people, we call ourselves penny ballers. Because we have tremendous aspirations, but we can only afford what we can afford. And we looked at things like minor league baseball teams, and we're fortunate enough to come across, through a sports broker, an indoor football league team, an arena football team in the panhandle of Texas. My colleague and I, Max, went down to this location in Texas, about 3 hours northwest of Dallas, and town of about 300,000 people, arena of about 5,000 people, like a hockey arena. And the game is played in a hockey rink style, 200 by 85 feet. In football terms, about half the size, about 50 yards instead of 100. And we sat down at the ground level, right next to Melyssa. I've seen a lot of sports. This was arguably by far the most exciting sports. It's like hockey without the skates. These men are so fast. They're flying and they're hitting and they hit so hard they'll fly over the arena edge onto the ground, and the fans will put them up and then put them back in, and it's intimate, and it's driven by families, all these kids and families just having a blast. It's affordable entertainment. And my colleague and I, coming from a larger city, said, my goodness, I think we have to figure out a way to get into this. The world has to see this. And so we tried, everything, we're still business folks, and it's all about the numbers. We love the business model, but the numbers didn't work out. So flash forward from 2019 to the present, an opportunity came about where that same team was not going to play in their league. I will make a caveat that I did make a very small investment in I mentioned Canada. There was a pro national league, Canadian Premier League opened up, and I invested in an equity share. But I learned the business of sports from those folks. And that organization and that league had a $200 million media rights deal. The media rights are very critical for the revenue component of a strong league. And the organization that consulted them, we hired ultimately. And so flash forward to June of this year, we launched something called the AFA, the Arena Football Association. We took 5 teams in Texas. We played in June and July. We're proud to say we completed every game, despite one team had half their players wiped out due to COVID. We still got through it. We used national media. Our consultants got us a national media rights deal with a great specialist sports organization called Flow Sports, a big streaming, millions of subscribers on their platform. And so we had that national media rights deal with there were 4 or 5 other leagues, and only one of them had a national media rights deal, and we did it out the gate. We were sponsored by a big national brand, which very few other leagues had. And we had artificial intelligence production cameras that we imported from Israel. So, state of the art, and created standardization of the video feed to our audiences. So we had and we didn't announce this league. And there was a reason, Melyssa. A lot of even friends and family said, well, for those of you in the sports world that know the story of the AAF, which was a very hyped up, the Ebersol family started that, and that failed mid-season. And the XFL just came out, and that failed. And the AFL failed 2 years ago and went bankrupt. So the question was, if all these leagues with all this money and all these minds, and I heard the term, a lot of smart people have worked on this, what makes you think your league in a pandemic
right
will work? So we'll just do it.
Well, that's the power of innovation, right? Those diverse minds coming together,
right? A different set of eyes, right? A diversity of thought occurred in this really a rural area. This different kind of lens came on this league and identified opportunity. That is diversity 4.0 that occurred.
Yes.
So now you can see a lesson learned. The first thing you can do as an entrepreneur is figure out some kind of diversity 4.0 model, lens, or otherwise. That will yield some kind of great business opportunity for you. We don't know where, how, but you leverage diversity 4.0, diversity of thought on a business situation to see what kind of innovation you come up with. That's the first thing.
I love it.
The second lesson learned from that approach is do your homework, right? We didn't move. We were excited, right? We could have been emotive and purchased something. Guess what? We would have purchased a team that would have gone into the pandemic because we had sober thought, great due diligence, driven analysis. We came to a rational and sober conclusion not to purchase a team. All right? Do your homework. Base your decisions, particularly critical, on data. And I know people love their gut. Don't do it. We don't do decisions on our guts. I'm just going to tell you, never.
Yeah.
Who knows what the outcome could that be? Oh, my gut says this. Well, it might say something tomorrow. No offense to the gut people out there. A lot of billionaires have done. We don't do gut.
Yeah.
Well, maybe it's because we are Black entrepreneurs and we've got to do data. So particularly for entrepreneurs of color, don't live on what people tell you or hopes and dreams. Data first, due diligence, data, homework, and research. So that's the second lesson learned. Leverage those pieces to make a great business decision. And we made a great business decision in 2019, and that is not to buy. Right? So, right? The third piece is, well, if the business model, particularly not to buy, isn't right, buy the model. Right? Don't be afraid. We changed the business model. We said, you know what? We don't want a team. We want to build the league. Because the business model of the team was a profit model. We learned how to not lose money with teams, but we said, that's not the value. The value is scaling that to national leagues. So the AFA is built on a world-class business model that leverages and focuses on tier 2 markets or markets of 200,000 to usually a million that can yield profitability from day one. Right?
Wow.
Okay.
That's incredible. I mean, just the amount of practical knowledge that example brought is amazing. So, and I'm going to repeat it. If you don't like the business model, change the model. I love it. I love it.
Change the model. And so now to the reality, then the fourth piece, quietly implement it. Do not listen to people telling you what you can or you can do. This is your model. You can do whatever you want. Okay? Don't ever listen to people saying, what? If we listened and said, Vince McMahon didn't do it with $275 million, so why would he even bother? We wouldn't have launched the league. But what we did say is, we will launch it quietly on our own. We had a bunch of lessons learned, and we'll reflect and evaluate and consider next steps to announce it. So that's the fourth thing. Implement it, prototype it, run it, operate it, whatever that business is, get the quirks out before you really push it out to market. So the real thing is pilot your idea for real. No matter how small or how big, just pilot it. Just get it out there. See it. Do not let it sit in the idea phase. Pilot it out. The fifth piece is, if that pilot works, scale the living daylights. And so November 4th, I will be announcing the league to the world at a big summit presented by AARP and JP Morgan Chase. And we'll be announcing the league and its 2022 season, which will have 8 teams. And our goal by 2030 is to have 100 teams in 8 major territories and division across the United States, with the ultimate goal and vision as follows, which is to be a Big Six sports league. So Big Six means there's AFA, American Football Association, MLS, NFL, MLB, NHL, NBA. One of the Big Six. But here's the catch, Melyssa. We're built with diversity at the core of the institution. No Big Six sports league has been built with diversity. And what we mean by that is, right now, Melyssa, 87% of our owners are either women or people of color.
Wow.
7%.
Oh my
Unheard
goodness.
of.
Absolutely.
Coaches, female coaches. We're going to have referees in wheelchairs or who may not have their full legs, right? Or some disability that's prevented them to participate in other leagues. They will be very much participating in our diverse suppliers, stakeholders, a whole host of areas that will create access, and we will create far more jobs, particularly for Black males. We will not have commoditized models where Black males come in and they're used and abused, paid a few bucks and gone, and then they're bankrupt. It's just 77% of the NFL players. Our league is a league for life. Our players out the gate will be provided with career counseling. They'll be provided jobs, coaches, mentors, so that they are successful on and off the field during their stint in the league, and they will be successful contributors and model ambassadors as alumni of the league.
Wow. Congratulations.
Okay.
That is so exciting.
Yeah.
And there's so many, I think whoever's listening, you're going to have to come back and listen to it again and again, because there's so much that you just gave us in all of that, in terms of just helping people feel not only like they have access, but that they have a pathway for their future, development, retention. There's just so many nuggets in, belonging and making sure that people have that ability to feel like they can take part in all aspects of their humanness.
Yes.
So I thank you for that tremendous example. And I'm so looking forward to hearing more about it.
Absolutely.
As you all launch and amplify your voices.
Yes.
What a wonderful way to close this incredible conversation. And again, I want to just thank you, Doug, for coming on and sharing the treasure troves of wisdom that you bring as we really just develop a whole new world as we think it. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you, Melyssa. What a treat and honor. And I'm just so thankful to have this opportunity. You've done an extraordinary job of bringing in, I know, a diversity of different personalities and backgrounds. If there's any way I can be helpful and supportive or to return back would be fantastic. I'm here to serve.
Thank you so much. If you're enjoying this episode, go back and listen to Monique Nelson, the CEO of UWG, in season 1. Thanks for joining me on the Jali podcast. Please subscribe so you won't miss an episode. See you next week.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.